What is going on, fellow alchemists? Welcome to Quasi-Astrology. Today we are doing Mercury in the sign of Taurus and Mercury in the second house. So I shan't delay, let's get stuck into it. So Mercury in Taurus, what we see with Mercury in Taurus is we see a slower, less dynamic and adjustable type of Mercury. Because Taurus is a fixed succedent earth sign, what happens in Taurus is that we see Mercury slow down in its rapid progression of basically interpreting and using its dynamic movement to really figure out and establish some sort of expression through itself. Remember, Mercury is a very sacred planet. Mercury is the closest planet to the sun, and what we see in Mercury is Mercury acts as the scribe. We've seen Mercury be basically described as in the Egyptian pantheon as Thoth. We've seen Mercury as the mischievous god or the god of mischief in Loki in the Nordic and Norse mythology. And what we always see is this nature of Mercury trying to use the duality and concepts provided by the universe, all of the principles that are present and all the elements that one can use, and utilizing that to find alternative expressions for a new, entirely redesigned picture of the given state of our cosmos. So even though Mercury doesn't find the fluidity and adjustable nature that it can have in other signs, especially in the air signs, where we see Mercury more dynamic and movable, we see that even though Taurus is a fixed earth sign, Mercury can still find exaltation here, and this is where the importance of the detailed concepts of your natal birth chart really come into play. The aspects of the decanates or the decans in your chart really formulate a concept of understanding how Mercury fits into this specific part of your chart. So in Taurus and the second house, which is traditionally ruled over by Taurus, Mercury can only operate with the fixed earthly nature of that sign. But also remember that the traditional ruler of Taurus is Venus, and this Venetian influence is the aspect of Venus utilizing the more fluid nature that can be present in Taurus. This is where the sensuality comes in, because Venus rules over the seminal fluids. Venus is the connectivity, the point in which two elements can mix together and utilize themselves in their own way and sexual manner to create something more than what was. So Venus is the very lucrative, movable fluidity that is present in the sign of Taurus, despite it being a fixed earth sign. And this is why Mercury, in particular, when it comes into the first decan, which just surprisingly happens to be ruled over by Mercury and Venus, we see Mercury finding exaltation in this part of your natal birth chart if it is sitting in Taurus. We see Mercury finally using and utilizing the aspects that Venus uses, where Venus provides the juices, the very juicy, sumptuous nature of Venus, and allows Mercury to utilize this movement, to utilize a generated force within the Venetian elements present within this sign. That applies to the second house as at the same time. There is an aspect of that kind of movability that can be provided due to the presence or the influences of Venus as the very strict ruler of this precise part of your natal birth chart or of the sign of Taurus. So whilst Venus can really help Mercury exert some of its more mercurial dynamic influences in Taurus, we must always remember the reason for this, because Mercury rules over the central nervous system. The central nervous system is the pathways that are set up by the lunar aspects of our moon. The moon provides the lunar pathways, and through the lunar pathways, Mercury operate. For this reason, when we do switch over to Vedic astrology, we understand that the moon, in this case Chandra, is the masculine aspect of the moon, and the masculine aspect of the moon was the father of Budha Graha, or the father of Mercury. Mercury finds its paternal or progenitor in the likes of the moon, and that is why the moon and Venus have a similar aspect, where Venus rules over the sexual seminal fluids. We also see the moon ruling over more of the pathways in which those seminal fluids can move in between, and Mercury works with those pathways both in Taurus and of course outside in the more esoteric concepts of Mercury's operation. But to really understand what Mercury does in Taurus, we have to understand what Taurus really is as a sign. In esoteric astrology, Taurus works with the concept of perfection through creation. We are perfecting the nature of our own creation. This is where we have just been born and we are trying to find and utilize all of the aspects around us to really ensure our survival. This can best be seen by a newborn infant who's just been born, and really parallels, or the polarity of that newborn infant's core values and identity is centralized around the mother. The core identity of this child really identifies through the mother, and it is through the mother that the child basically finds and is able to sustain their body. This is also surprisingly one of the reasons why Taurus is known for being so stubborn. Because Taurus needs the nature, the vitamins, the sustenance around it, and why the second house is not necessarily just the house of monetary gains, but in the esoteric realm, the house of your survival. And I'd emphasize that the second house is actually the house of your survival, rather than just the house where you try and gain the sustenance to sustain yourself through life. So in the second decan of Taurus, we also see Mercury really exalt here. Again, we have in the first decan a Mercury-Venus triplicity, but in the second decan, we actually see a Moon and Mercury triplicity. As I previously mentioned before, the reasons for this is because the pathways that the Moon provides, the lunar pathways, are an opportunity for Mercury to utilize and work with. And this is where Mercury works down in our bodies. It works on the peripheral and central nervous system, allowing for us to interact with our world and to pattern out the patterns that Mercury wishes to bring out through the influences of our limbs, through the peripheral system. So having Mercury in the second decan really emphasizes the feminine aspect of this sign of Taurus. This is where Venus and the Moon are all present, in basically representing the juicy, sumptuous, creative juices that ooze out of the aspects of the universe into our solar system, and allow Mercury to toy with the dynamic elements that are present, showcasing new expressions otherwise never thought of or possibly conceived of before. However, when we get to the third decan of Taurus, this is where we see the prevalence of Saturn. This is where Saturn sits in Taurus, if Saturn were to find exaltation in this sign. This is where Saturn basically preps the very wild, childlike curiosity of Mercury and gets it ready for the more practical application that it is required to do once it steps into the sign in which it exalts, Gemini. In Gemini, we see the higher expression of Mercury, which is really unapologetic and showcases the very prevalent nature of this mercurial aspect. But in order to get into Gemini, Mercury has to go through the steps that are prevalent in the third decan, in which Saturn allows for the practical transmutation of lead and allows Mercury to progress into the higher ideals of Gemini. And once in Gemini, express the second ray of wisdom and love, which is the prevailing and dominant ray in our solar system, which is the very ray that our sun utilizes to influence us with the love and the wisdom that the sun contributes. Jupiter also finds exaltation in the second ray. But we're stepping aside here and we're sidetracking from the main premise of this, which is Mercury in Taurus has different aspects and different expressions, and you can only really understand that once you get into the decans. If you can understand the process and the prevalence of the planets in each decan, and which planet exalts with the nature of Mercury and which planet will perhaps debilitate or show a different, more practical side of Mercury, you really understand how you can utilize Mercury. And that applies to Mercury in the second house at the same time. Because remember, as I previously mentioned, the second house is about how you survive. It's not necessarily about how and how you sustain yourself and all of the physical needs you need, as much as it is about the mental, the spiritual, and the more robust aspects of our very being, of our very creation here on this physical plane D, in our journey in towards spirit and cultivating spirit over time, which is what makes us all alchemists. So fellow alchemists, I hope you really enjoyed that video. Please don't forget to subscribe. If you did enjoy it, drop a like down below. And more importantly, go into the comment section, tell us what it's like having Mercury, which decan your Mercury sits in. And I'll see you in the next one when I do Mercury in Gemini and Mercury in the third house. So until then, take good care of yourself. Goodbye.